Another Impact Wrestling star has quietly departed the company. We have an update when it comes to Chelsea Green's injury suffered last weekend at Sacrifice. Plus, Deonna Purrazzo has some interesting comments that we're going to talk about too. All this and more in today's Impact Wrestling News. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of Impact Wrestling. So let's start off talking about another name that has quietly departed the company, that being Fallah Bahh. Yes, Fallah Bahh appears to be done with Impact Wrestling. This comes from a report from Sean Ross Sapp over at Fightful Select, who says that it appears that Fallah Bahh is indeed done with Impact Wrestling after almost 5 years with the company. Bahh was quietly removed from Impact Wrestling's roster page in January alongside several other Impact Wrestling names. We'll talk about that in a second. And he was then re-added to the Virtual Basement's Wrestling Code video game shortly after. Why is that significant? Why is the video game part of that significant? Well, Impact had asked their talent not to be included in the game back in 2020. And Fightful Select are reporting that not much has really changed since then. So that sort of policy status is still kind of the same. They don't want Impact Wrestling talent being involved in Virtual Basement Wrestling Code's video game. Now, Fightful have also spoken with several Impact Wrestling talents and staff that have confirmed that Fallah Bahh has indeed not been at any of the Impact Wrestling television tapings recently, which again would imply that he has departed the company. Now, he's not the only name, of course, to recently leave Impact. Over the last few months, names like Rohit Raju, Larry D, AC Romero, Matt Striker, and others have left the company or their contracts with the company have expired. Fightful are also saying to expect some more turnover as people on the roster expect it to be, quote, constantly refreshed as time goes on. Now, Fightful said they have reached out to Fallah Bahh and Impact Wrestling officials, but they haven't heard back as of right now. Now, obviously, Fallah Bahh, I was a fan of his work, right? I was a fan of his work, and he was a part of a tag team with TJP for a little while. Look, this is going to, and I really don't mean this in terms of any disrespect whatsoever. I really, really don't. But if you do look at those names, Fallah Bahh, Rohit Raju, Larry D, AC Romero, they're all names that it's not going to be this sort of ginormous blow to Impact Wrestling. And we're in a really strange time at the moment. People criticize AEW for constantly bringing in new talent. Oh, you're signing a new talent every week and all that kind of stuff. But the way I look at it is we're in a really unprecedented time, and there has never been this many top quality free agents out there in recent professional wrestling history. There just hasn't. The last couple of years, because of the pandemic, because of WWE's budget cuts and all that kind of stuff, have been a freak situation. We're talking about a time right now where there are names like Bray Wyatt, Karrion Kross, Braun Strowman, Ember Moon, Mia Yim. The list can go on and on of these talents that are free agents, and there have been names that were free agents. Now they've signed with AEW or Impact Wrestling, whether it's Buddy Matthews, Jeff Hardy. The list does go on and on and on. That we're in such a really, just a strange time. And I do think, by the way, when it comes to WWE releasing these mass releases that we have seen over the course of the last year or so, I really do think that will slow down now. I think that, for whatever reason, they were deciding to trim their budgets, and you can agree or disagree with them. I disagree on a lot of the cuts that they have made in terms of talent, but if you're going to look at dollars and cents, they made $1 billion in revenue last year, and not having all of those talents that they released under contract certainly did help them out financially. Now, under the guise of budget cuts, budget cuts, times are tough. Times aren't tough for WWE, but they wanted to make more money. They, as Vince McMahon said on the Pat McAfee show, they wanted to trim the fat, and I can't argue with that. They're a publicly traded company. Vince McMahon's loyalty is not to the pro wrestlers. Vince McMahon's loyalty is to himself and the shareholders in his publicly traded company. So I can get that. Why am I talking about that when we're talking about Impact Wrestling? Well, in the same vein, Impact Wrestling also has to make space for these new people that are going to come in. They certainly don't have an unlimited budget. I've mentioned several times before that I think people underestimate Impact Wrestling's spending power because they are owned by Anthem, who are a very, very, very wealthy company. That's why they're able to purchase Impact Wrestling. That's why they've managed to purchase Access TV, and the list goes on of the companies and projects and brands that they own. So people kind of underestimate their spending power, specifically Impact Wrestling spending power, but their talent budget is not unlimited. So when they're looking to bring in these new names, and they've missed out on a couple, whether it was Buddy Matthews or whether it was Keith Lee or some names that they were interested in, ultimately they're going to have to let some people go if they want to bring some new people in, and that's what they've also done recently, and I expect them to continue to do so. So at the same time that they're handing out new contracts to people like Josh Alexander and Moose and Jordan Grace, which will be for improved terms, obviously, because not a lot of wrestlers sign new deals for less money, especially up-and-coming talents like Moose, like Jordan Grace, like Josh Alexander. You do have to let some people go, and as I mentioned, of those names, I like Larry D. I've seen interviews of him, seems like a great guy. Rohit Raju, again, he was a former X Division champion. He, as he said in the interview, wanted more money. Impact Wrestling said, it's probably a bit too much money. If you feel like you can go and get yourself over to the point where you feel like, we can maybe rediscuss your valuation and all that kind of stuff, then maybe things will change. But I look at those names that have been released, and Falabar's the same, where I go, is that really day-to-day going to affect Impact Wrestling and new names that are coming in? I don't think so. And I think the interesting point that Fightful are reporting here is, as some of the Impact Wrestling roster members state, this roster is going to be constantly refreshed. And I think what they're kind of saying is, look, new names are going to continue to come in. Because, again, there are a lot of free agents on the market. They still really badly want Wyndham Rotunda. Now, frankly, I don't know if he will come into Impact Wrestling. I know they're at WrestleCon, Multiverse of Matches. Bray Wyatt is at WrestleCon, I believe, that weekend. Whether or not he's going to appear at that event, I doubt it, but you never know. And maybe this is Impact Wrestling going, you know what? We do want to get that big name, right? I know Braun Strowman probably is very unlikely now because he's doing the whole control your narrative thing with EC3 and whatever that is. But he's doing that. Maybe it's Impact Wrestling going, look, what we need is a big contract. What we need is a big player. And at the moment, considering all of the people we have under contract or under deals, maybe it's going to take us letting go 3 or 4 people to get that one big person in. Now, another person that's contract expires was Matt Striker. That is someone where I go, I still think there was value in keeping him around. I'm a fan of the new announce team. Obviously, Tom Hannifan, Matthew Rewald, I think are excellent. They've got chemistry from their time in WWE 205 Live, so that sort of quick connectivity is there, and I think Sacrifice recently is a great example of the great work that they've been doing on commentary. So it's not a huge blow in losing Matt Striker. I still say you could have done a 3-man booth with them, but that's me nitpicking. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's probably fine. Where will Falabar go, and what will he do? It's kind of the same for what I've said about Rohit Raju or Larry D or AC Romero. I think they'll do fine on the independent scene. I think if you're looking at a more national company, or a bigger company than just select indie shows, I think the NWA is where you could probably end up. Certainly Billy Corgan, we know, enjoys the more of the, shall we say, 1970s, 1980s style of pro wrestling, where just people were just big. And not even necessarily big in terms of, they were jacked up and muscular. He just likes big guys. He likes the idea of the ring needs to be reinforced, pal, because we've got 2 big guys going up against each other. And I think that's what, he's kind of looking for. He's looking to separate himself from, say, modern day pro wrestling and going back to maybe the time of the 1980s and such. And Falabar, I guess, kind of fits into that. So I could see him there. I could see him in MLW as well. Ring of Honor, we don't really know what Ring of Honor is going to look like going forward, and we don't really know, again, just the sheer logistics of Ring of Honor in terms of, like, what's the situation going to be when it comes to, are they under a Ring of Honor contract? Are they under an AEW contract? Is it going to be kept completely separate, or is there going to be some overlap? So I would probably say no. Could I see him showing up on AEW Dark? Well, look, Rohit Raju did, so who knows? Who knows what can happen with that? But it's one of those names that, like a lot of people, he left the roster page in January. Rachel Ellering was another name, and they're gone. And I expect the departures to continue, but I also expect the incomings to continue as well. And that's the situation there. We have an update when it comes to Chelsea Green and the injury that she suffered at Sacrifice last weekend. Now, as noted last week, Impact Wrestling star Chelsea Green suffered a wrist injury at last Saturday's pay-per-view Sacrifice, or Impact Plus event rather, Sacrifice. Now, during the match between Deonna Purrazzo and Green for the Ring of Honor Women's Championship, there was a moment where the ref threw up an X sign with his arms to signify her legitimate injury. Deonna Purrazzo checked on her, but Chelsea responded with a strike to the face. Deonna then locked in an armbar as the referee stopped the match, but the champion refused to let go, so it was unclear if it was work or serious injury. At the time, time. I felt that it was a work, but it looks like it actually was not a work. Green later made several posts to social media that made it clear that she was indeed in the hospital because of her wrist. Now, F4WOnline.com is now reporting that she is suffering from a fractured left radius, which is the fourth injury now for Chelsea Green on that left wrist. Now, surgery won't be necessary, but she will continue to wear a cast like the one she wrestled in on this past week's Impact. The news was also noted during the most recent episode of Impact Wrestling. So, Chelsea Green has horrible history when it comes to this wrist injury, right? She was released from WWE as part of their ongoing budget cuts that started when the COVID-19 pandemic began. At the time, she was sidelined with another wrist injury, one she suffered during her first WWE televised appearance on SmackDown back in November of 2020. I mean, there's a couple of different ways to think about it. I mean, one, you can look at it as really bad luck, and I suppose it is. Two, you can also look at it from the flip side and say, this is a problem because, I mean, if you fracture your wrist or you break your wrist 4 times in the space of, 2 years, there's something wrong going on there. Whether it's a case of bumping wrong, whether it's a case of falling wrong, whether it's a case of, your wrist just being weaker. I mean, I'm no doctor, so I don't know, but one would assume that if you break your wrist, it's like dislocating your shoulder or anything. If you dislocate your shoulder, you are more prone for it to dislocate in the future. I don't know if that's the same when it comes to breaking your wrist. You can let me know in the comment section below, but that's a problem. I mean, that is a problem for her, and I'm sure her doctors will be saying to her, you know what, look, this is happening a lot, and if you're going to continuously fracture your wrist or break your wrist, you're going to eventually do some serious damage. So this time, take longer or do something different. I don't know. Again, it could just be a case of real bad luck, and maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe it's a case of you need to work safer, it's a case of bad luck, or it's a case of the wrist injury is actually more severe than we thought, or you've just got, I don't know, genetically, predisposed to having weak wrists. I don't know, but it's a concern, certainly, and I would hope that she was kind of resting in it on Impact this past week, and, you kind of cringe when you see that because you just know that you could be doing some really permanent damage to it, and we certainly don't want to see that. So we'll keep you updated when we know more about her injury. Finally, Deonna Purrazzo did an interview. She had some quite interesting comments about this. Now, Deonna Purrazzo has called Impact Wrestling the hub of the wrestling multiverse. Now, speaking with Joey G of Wrestling Headlines, the Ring of Honor and AAA Women's World Champion says that Impact doesn't get the credit it deserves for being the hub of the wrestling multiverse. She said, quote, I think expect the unexpected. What's been so fun and reinvigorating about wrestling right now, the entire wrestling community, but also specifically Impact Wrestling, is this multiverse that we all get to go through these doors. And I think Impact Wrestling doesn't get the credit it deserves for being the hub of the multiverse. We've opened the doors to any company to have a working relationship with us and bring their champions here, to bring their top talent here to compete against the top talent and Impact Wrestling. So I think that's what's exciting. You never know who's going to pop up at our show next Friday and Saturday in Philly. You never know who's going to pop up in Poughkeepsie at Rebellion. So the possibilities are endless, and I think we're going to keep everybody on their toes. So that's why, more than anything, they should be going to the shows when they're in the area and tuning into Access TV or YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube too. So, I mean, I think it's a valid point. I think you could argue that Impact Wrestling, whilst AEW President Tony Khan was certainly the one to coin the term, the Forbidden Door. That whole crossover thing has been happening before, but certainly more companies, more major companies doing it on much of a more freer basis has happened. I think the pandemic kind of forced the issue when it came to that, but certainly I think a ton of credit has to go to Impact Wrestling. They have worked with more companies than I think anyone over the course of the last couple of years. Just look at them. WWE, they have, because of course Mickie James was in the Royal Rumble. We know the AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover. There was a Ring of Honor crossover as well. We know the AAA crossover. We know NWA crossover with the Mickie James and Empower stuff. I mean, the crossover there is huge, and of course you can go to New Japan and obviously Pro Wrestling Noah as well in the multiverse of matches. So I think Impact Wrestling does deserve a huge amount of credit when it comes to working with other companies. I think that it's interesting to see your comments actually after the last video I did about Josh Alexander and those original AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover plans that were scrapped ultimately because Christian got hurt. And I think a lot of Impact Wrestling fans maybe felt like the Impact maybe didn't get the best deal out of that, but it certainly hasn't changed their perspective on working with other companies and their desire to work with other companies. And I think that's probably right, because they realize what they are. They realize the platform that they're on is smaller than other major companies, but what they can do to create buzz is do things that haven't been done before. And that's working with companies, that's having, people on your roster holding the title, or other people roster holding your title, and keep people guessing and keep people on their toes, as Deonna Purrazzo says. So I do think that Impact Wrestling deserves a lot of credit for that. I really do. But anyway, guys, be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on today's Impact Wrestling news stories, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right-hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.